So in this video, we're going to talk about writing scripts in Excel Online using JavaScript, or actually TypeScript is actually what's used here. But if you know JavaScript, it's going to be very easy for you to adjust. Now, before we actually start writing any code, the first thing we need to understand is the hierarchy in spreadsheet applications. What we need to understand is the terminology, what's an application, what's a workbook, what's a worksheet or sheet, and then we have range or cell. So when we think about application, that would be the software basically that's being used. So like Excel would be your application, or if you have a different spreadsheet application like Google Sheets, that would be your application. Workbook would be the entire file you're working on. So file, you will also hear spreadsheet. So we can open files using this application. Then within the workbook, we have worksheets or sheets. Those would be these tabs down here. So if I click on this pluses, now I have 3 worksheets or 3 sheets, or sometimes you'll hear people say tabs. And then in each one of these worksheets, we have ranges or cells. So range would be like a range of cells, like so. Or a cell would be a cell, like an individual cell. Now within the cell, you could have different properties of that cell. So for example, we can have a value in a cell by typing some value in the cell. We can also change the background color of that cell. We can change the font color of the cell. So you can see how I can change different things about that cell. And these would be all the properties of that particular cell. So now that we understand this, let's start. So I'm going to go to this automate section on top here. And you can see here we have this option for a new script. Now I do know there's this record actions that you can record macros, but we're going to be writing our own code to understand how that actually works. So I'm going to do new script. And that's going to open this code editor. And as you can see, it started a new script for me. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bigger, like this. So basically, it's going to start with this main function here. We have this brackets, and within those brackets, we're going to write the code for our function. So what's going to happen is that when you click on this run button, it's going to go within this code and find this main function, and it's going to run that function. Now within this function, we have this variable called workbook. If you don't understand what variables or variable types are, don't worry about it for now. But if you're coming from JavaScript background, you might not be familiar with this. And what this is, after the colon, is the type of this particular variable, which is called workbook. You could call this variable WB or whatever you want to call it. I'm going to leave it workbook. So now we can go within this, and this workbook now refers to the file. Remember the workbook right there. Now if I type that workbook variable and hit dot, we'll get what we can do within this particular file. And you can see there are different methods here that you could use. For the time being, I want to get to our worksheets that are within this particular workbook. So let's start by getting the currently opened worksheet. So we can do that by doing get active worksheet, this. So that would be the active worksheet, meaning currently it's sheet 1. Now, what we can do, we can go here and we can save this in a variable so we can use it later. So I'm going to call it const sheet 1 equals this. You can name your variables whatever you want. Just make sure no special characters, no spaces. And you cannot start with a number. So now, within the workbook, we got the worksheet. So we're here now. Now within the worksheet, if you remember, we have ranges or cells. So that means if I go within the sheet 1 now, and hit dot, now we get things we can do on the worksheet. And as you can see, we can activate it, we can do all these different things. But right now, I'm going to go to this get methods and see there is an option get cell. And there's also, if I type R, there's an option get range. There's also get range by indexes. So right now, I'll do get range, open parentheses. And here we're going to pass that Excel range as a string. So for example, if I type B4, that would refer to this cell right here. So let's go ahead and save this in a variable too. So I'll call it my range equals this. And now for that range, which will be that single cell for us, we'll have different things about that particular cell we can change or get information. So let's say we would like to add some value in that cell. To add something, we'll use set, and to get something, we'll use get. And this will give us what are some things we can set. So you can see we have set formula, we have set hyperlink, number format. If I keep going here, there's set value. Everything is case sensitive here, so you want to be careful. And if you do lowercase v, it wouldn't work. It's not the same as uppercase V here. And here for this value, we can basically just enter some value. So for now, I'll enter some number, 46. So right now, if I just go ahead and save the script and run this, you'll see how our script enters 46 right here in B4. Now, if I wanted that to be some text instead of being number 46, we would put that text in quotes. So numbers, no quotations, text in quotes. So if I do something like this, hit save, and we'll run this, you'll see now it says hello there in that particular cell. Now remember that the way this script works, it's going to get us our currently active sheet, then it's going to find the B4 cell, and then in that cell, it's going to type hello there. Now that means that I could go, for example, to the sheet 3, and if I run the same script, now it's going to get my currently active sheet, which is this, and it will basically enter that value again in B4 cell now in this particular sheet. So what if I want to be able to be on sheet 3, but enter something in sheet 2? So what I could do, instead of getting the active worksheet here, I can do dot and do get worksheet, open parentheses, and here we're going to pass the name of that sheet in quotes. So the worksheet here is called sheet 2. So I'm going to type sheet 2. That's the name of this particular sheet here. Let's change this to B1 so we can see the difference. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And now notice that I'm currently on sheet 3, and I'm going to run this. And nothing happens on sheet 3, but if I go to sheet 2, you'll see that we have in B1 cell, hello there. So here I can change whether I want my active sheet or I want a particular worksheet. Now that's the name here. So if this was called data tab or something like that, then you would go here and type data tab. So now let's try to expand this range to multiple cells. So instead of B1, I'll do something like D2:D7. And I'm going to go ahead and save this and run it. And you can see that this range literally means a range. So we took this entire range of cells and we write hello there to that entire range. So with ranges, we can also have different things in different cells in that range. So for example, let's make this a little shorter. I'll go from D2 through D4. And let's say instead of making that entire from D2 through D4 just hello there, I want to be able to just put 3 different things in these different cells. So the way I would do that, instead of doing set value, which is what I've done here, I could do set values. And here we can pass an array of arrays. And the way you define that, you put this square brackets. And within the square brackets, you have rows. Currently, in this selection from D2 through D4, I have 3 different rows. What that means is that I'm going to have 3 arrays within this main array. So within this main square brackets, we have 3 square bracket sets, comma separated. And each one of this is one of the rows in this range. So for example, if I enter 54, 23, and then the last one, let's just do some text. Like so. If I go ahead and save this and run it, you'll see how we set those 3 cells, 54, 23, and some text with different values. Now we could have declared this array on a previous line. So I'm going to cut it out of here, go here and create another constant. I'll call this one data and have this. And then I'll pass that data here as values, which will accomplish exactly the same thing. Now here you can do new lines like this to make it easier to read this. And now we have this array. And in this array, we have this 3 different rows. And we can even move these to separate lines like this. And this is going to work exactly the same way. Now, one thing you want to remember is that this is a row and it's an array. The reason for that is we could, instead of just going from D2 through D4, we could go from D2 through E4. So we can go another column right. So in this case, now we have 2 columns like this and 3 rows. That would be the area. Now, what I'm selecting here really doesn't matter. I'm just illustrating what it is. Now I can go here and have those values within that row, comma separated. And then for our second row, we'll have, again, 2 columns of values. I'll just do line 1, line 2, line 3. But those could be any values. So I'm going to save this and rerun it so you can see what happens. And you can see how we write this entire array to that range. Again, has no relationship with my selection. If I just clear this, click someplace here, and rerun this, you'll see that will happen anyways, because our selection really happens over here. Now, when you select the range, you can either select the range using this Excel notation, going D2, E4, like so, or you can use a different method that's called get range by indexes. And this will allow us to use numbers instead of using those regular spreadsheet references. So if I wanted to do the same sort of selection, so in this case, like 3 rows, 2 columns, something like this, the way I would do that, I would start with the row number first. So that would be row 4. As you can see, start row number, row 4, comma. Then you have starting column numbers. So A would be column 1, B would be column 2. So the starting position here is A1. So I would do 1 for column A, comma again. Then we have this row count. So that means how many rows would be in this selection. So we have 3 rows. So I'm going to go ahead and type 3. And then finally, the last one here is the column count. So we have 2 columns. So we'll just type 2. Not 3, 2. So if I save this and rerun it, click away so you can see what happens. You can see that it probably doesn't do what you would have expected. Because with indexes, you're really dealing with positions starting from 0 instead of starting from 1. So what that means is that this 4 should have been 3, and this 1 should really have been 0. So the way we count this, we want row number 4, so 0, 1, 2, 3, and then we want column number 1, which is 0. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this and rerun this again so you can see how this works. So I'm going to save that and run. And you can see now it will place it where you would have expected it to go. Now, using indexes has advantages. One of those is that if your data that you're trying to write to your spreadsheet is going to change, then you can have more dynamic way of figuring out your range size and things like that. To be able to do that, we need to define this before we actually get the range. So I'm going to move this line. I'm going to cut it out of here and move it below over here. So now first we define our data. I'm going to delete this line so I have more space here. So now we have this data, and this data has 3 rows in it. So remember, this is the row count, this third argument. So now instead of hard coding 3, I could do something like data.length. And that would basically count how many rows are in this data and use that as row count. And then the same way here as a column count, what we can do, we can grab that data, and within this data, we can grab this first row. And the way we can do that is by the index of that, and indexes here start from 0. So the first row here would be this, 0. And then within that, we can count the length, and that should tell us how many things are in this array. So there are 2, which will be the number of columns. So what's good about this is that this will still work the same way if I clear this and rerun this. Let's save this. As you can see, it still works as you would have expected it to work. This will also work if I clear this, if I go here and add more rows to this data. And it will automatically adjust those counts. And maybe I would like to add an extra column to this as well. Now, if you add a column to the first line, you have to add a column to your next lines as well. So now using this, it should automatically calculate the number of rows and columns and place it in our sheet like it should. So there we go. So I want to clear this again. Now I've been clearing this every time manually. Let's add a line in our code to actually clear the data before it starts doing anything, so I don't have to do this every time. So I'm going to go ahead and go to this line, and within that sheet, I'm going to get the range of cells I would like to clear. So I'll do get range. And I'll just do something like A1 through F20. So I'll call it clear range. Again, no spaces in your variable names. And then what we can do, we can take that range, and we should have different methods here, as you remember. And hopefully we have some clear methods here too. See, one of those is clear. So now if I save this, hopefully when I run, it should first clear this and then enter these. And as you can see, that happened kind of really quickly. So it clears it and then it enters this. And there we are. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Now, one other thing I want to show you is how to leave some of these cells blank. So what if I wanted, instead of this some text here, to leave that blank here? So I could go here and do null. And if I save and run this, you can see how that keeps this clear. So finally, let's also learn to get some values from our spreadsheet. So right now, I'm manually doing these values right here. But what if I wanted to get these values from my spreadsheet. So maybe I want to go grab these values from this particular range. So for that reason, I'm going to remove this clear because I don't want it to be cleared because I want to get those values from that particular range. And what I'll do, I'll just go ahead and add a line here to get our data range. So I'm going to call it source data range. And we're going to get it from that sheet 1. Probably not the best variable name for that particular variable, but nevertheless, that's what we have. And I'm just going to do a for through C7. So now, when I want to get this data, I'll simply just take that source data range and just use this get values method. And what that's going to do, it's going to go grab these values and store it in this data in that similar array of arrays form, which means now I could work with that data. So for example, maybe we want to grab that data and place it someplace else. So if I wanted that to be placed in that same sheet, maybe starting from here, that would be row number 8, which is index number 7. And it would be column number 5, which is index 4. So with this, we should be able to grab our data from this range and then basically place it over here. So if I save this and run it, you'll see that's what's going to happen. Now finally, let's end this particular lesson by, instead of putting those values in that same sheet here, let's try to place it on sheet 1, maybe starting in this A11 cell. So to do so, we'll go here and create a variable. And what we'll do something similar to this to get the actual sheet. So instead of data tab here, it would be sheet 1. We should probably rename this variable here. So we'll just call it source sheet. And use that same variable over here too, so that we get that data from that source sheet. It's just a variable name. We could have left sheet 1. It's just confusing. So we're going to get those values. Then we'll get this new target sheet. And within that target sheet, we would like to get the range. So instead of the sheet 1, it's going to go target sheet. And then again, we're going to get indexes in that target sheet. Now, if you remember, I want it in A11. So A would be 0. That's column number. And 11 would be 10, starting from 0. And all of this will live the same to calculate the length of our data based on this. And then finally, in this last line, I'm just going to move it down a little bit. We'll take that range and we'll set values to be that data. So I'm going to save this. So what's going to happen now, we're going to go grab that information from here and we're going to place it in the sheet 1. And it doesn't matter which tab I'm on when I run this, because in all of these lines, I never refer to my active sheet. I'm just grabbing the actual worksheet name. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And you can see we were able to grab that info from our data tab and place it over here. And that should do it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video.